You know, it's kind of wild to think that the idea of a non-physical part of us, it's not really some new age thing, is it?
No, not at all. I mean, you look back, the ancient Egyptians had the ka.
Right. And the Greeks, they
Yeah.
talked about the eidolon.
Exactly. And even like later on, Paracelsus, with his sidereal body, and Somad, folks were trying to wrap their heads around this stuff way back.
It's like this recurring intuition throughout history.
Mm-hmm. It suggests something fundamental, doesn't it? Like maybe we instinctively know there's more to us than just, well, flesh and bone.
Yeah, exactly. And that's pretty much what we're diving into today, thanks to this material you shared with us.
Right. Evolution in Two Worlds. André Luiz through Xavier and Vieira.
We're looking at this whole concept of the spiritual body. The book calls it corpo spiritual or psychosoma.
Uh-huh. It's nature, how it functions, how it connects to our physical lives, and our evolution, really.
So our goal here, for you listening, is to kind of unpack the core ideas. Make it clear, engaging, but, without getting totally bogged down in jargon.
Yeah, because stepping back, it's more than just belief. The book lays out this detailed mechanism, really, for how we operate beyond what current science can easily measure.
So this spiritual body, the book calls it a living form of the human creature.
And a plastic mediator.
Right, a plastic mediator, like an interface between spirit and body.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the phrase living sanctuary for our immortal consciousness, that really hits home.
A sanctuary. That emphasizes its role as the enduring part, doesn't it? The vessel for who we really are.
Precisely, the container for our experiences, our true self.
And its structure is totally different from our physical body, right?
Yeah.
It mentions subtle cells.
Uh-huh. Vibrating differently, a higher frequency, maybe? It's described as incredibly porous, adaptable.
Plastic, yeah, with an electromagnetic structure.
Uh-huh.
Sounds like it's constantly changing.
Well, that adaptability is crucial. The book makes a strong point that its form, its condition, it's all directly shaped by our mind.
Our thoughts.
Thoughts, feelings, and importantly, our moral conduct, how we act.
Wow, so we're literally sculpting this other body with our inner life.
That's the implication. It gives a whole new weight to, being mindful, living ethically. It's not just about this life, maybe.
Which connects right into the next point, how our thoughts, feelings, actions, they all link up.
Yeah, the book says everything, sentiments, thoughts, words, deeds, they all leave an imprint. An echo, maybe?
An imprint on the spiritual body.
Yeah.
And that imprint has consequences.
Mm-hmm. It's like classic cause and effect, but playing out on this other level. Our inner world isn't just fleeting thoughts. It's actively shaping this spiritual structure.
And the good news is we can refine it through moral development.
That's what it stresses. We have agency, we can improve its manifestations, enrich its qualities.
Okay, let's zoom out a bit.
Yeah.
Cosmic level. Where does this spiritual body even come from?
The book talks about the cosmic fluid, or divine plasma.
Okay, so like the fundamental building block of everything.
Kind of like the raw material, yeah. The clay from which everything, physical and spiritual, is molded. It sounds a bit like concepts of primary substance or energy you find in other philosophies, too.
And these divine intelligences use this stuff.
They co-create with it, guide atoms, form planets, which are described as cradles for spirit to evolve.
Cradles. Interesting. So planets aren't just rocks floating around. They're like evolutionary arenas.
Exactly. And they're not permanent either. They serve their purpose for ages, then eventually break down, reform. A huge cosmic cycle.
A cycle of creation and renewal. It makes the physical seem quite temporary in the grand scheme of things.
Right. The focus is really on the spirit's continuous journey, its evolution through these cycles.
Okay, so bringing it back down to us, how does this spiritual body interact with our physical one day to day? The book mentions vital centers.
Yeah, energy hubs within the spiritual body, things science hasn't really mapped out yet.
Like control panels for our energy.
Sort of. They're under the automatic direction of the soul, apparently. They coordinate cells in both bodies.
Both bodies. So they're managing things like, what, bone production, digestion.
That's the idea. Bone growth, intestinal lining, liver function, kidney filtration. All coordinated from these centers, like an internal management system.
That's fascinating. So even automatic bodily functions have this spiritual layer driving them.
Seems to be the proposal. It specifically mentions the coronary center and the cerebral center in the brain.
Okay, in the brain. And they interact, connect to our thoughts, our aura.
Yeah, the psychosphere or aura, that energy field around us. There's this detail, too, about the olfactory pathway, how smell mostly bypasses the thalamus.
Oh yeah, I saw that note. Connection via the mammillary body.
Right. It suggests a really intricate link maybe between senses, brain structure, and the spiritual body that we don't fully grasp.
Okay, so the big question. What happens to the spiritual body at physical death?
Well, it undergoes transformations, especially the book says in the gastric and generative center.
Transformations.
Yeah.
He talks about histolysis
Mm.
and spiritual histogenesis.
Mm.
Okay, histolysis is the physical breakdown, right?
Right, the physical body breaks down. Spiritual histogenesis, though, is proposed as a parallel process, a reformation in the spiritual body.
Reformation. So not just falling apart, but reorganizing.
Kind of, like the soul adapting, evolving based on the life lived. Death isn't an endpoint, but a transition, a restructuring of the spiritual body itself.
And what about those not in a good state? These ovoid bodies.
Yeah. Described as the mental body, holding sort of virtual organs, it seems linked to being in disequilibrium after death.
Like an unformed potential. Or maybe stuck.
It really shows how our mental state, even after death, impacts the spiritual body's structure. Like unresolved stuff, negative patterns could lead to a kind of stagnation there.
Which brings us to reincarnation. The book presents it as this ongoing cycle, right? Embodying in dense matter than subtle matter.
All for learning, for growth, developing intelligence through these repeated experiences, these reflex activities of the unconscious.
And it's not random, is it? It mentions heredity, but also affinity on the spiritual plane.
Exactly. It suggests these are compelling forces. We tend to reincarnate with souls we have connections or affinities with, often within similar soul groups or families, spiritually speaking.
The book also mentions divine sowers, guiding early forms.
Yeah, guiding the development early on. But as spirits evolve, they take on more responsibility for their own path.
So it's a progression from being guided to self-direction.
Right. It really emphasizes evolution, not just of physical forms, but of consciousness itself, our capacity to guide our own spiritual journey.
It's also fascinating how it explains organ development, like touch from amoeba impulses, vision from plasma sensitivity.
Smell in aquatic animals, taste in plants, even early sex sensations in algae. It's suggesting the physical develops based on the needs of the mental field, the spirit.
So mental and spiritual needs come first, shaping the physical form over time.
That's the perspective. Our form isn't arbitrary. It reflects the spirit's evolving needs and capabilities.
And this influence goes right down to the cells, how they organize based on thought.
Yeah, cells in the organic hive, as it calls it, take different forms based on position and the governing thought.
And those tissue culture experiments.
Yeah.
Cells survive outside the body but behave differently. More basically.
Right, tending towards amoeboid forms when outside that mental governance, it really underscores the mind's power or the spiritual body's direction over physical biology. Consciousness isn't just a byproduct, it shapes biology.
Okay, what about communication, language development?
Traced from basic sounds, mimicry, up to articulated words. And it suggests spiritual instructors played a role subtly influencing our vocal organs, the larynx.
So help from the spiritual side in developing language.
That's the idea.
Okay.
And language, in turn, boosts mental energy, creating this subtle energy ocean connecting incarnate and disincarnate minds, a shared mental space for interaction and growth.
Now, that metamorphosis analogy, using insects to explain disincarnation, that's quite vivid.
It really is, comparing complete and incomplete metamorphosis in insects to the transition process.
The key takeaway being the potential for radical transformation, right? Like a caterpillar to a butterfly. But our cocoon is our inner state.
Exactly. Spiritual histogenesis is likened to the pupa transforming. It highlights the restructuring potential after death. It also notes beings with less developed consciousness might return to the physical more quickly.
And our thoughts have a huge impact on this transformation.
Definitely. Consistent positive thought helps a more complete metamorphosis, but monoideism.
That fixed depressive thinking.
Yeah. That can lead to atrophy, stagnation, the ovoid form again. It's compared to bacteria forming spores when conditions are bad. A powerful image of how our mind shapes our spiritual journey.
Seriously, our mental state really dictates the post-mortem experience, according to this.
It seems critical. Now, the book also goes into these interactions between minds in the spiritual realm. Symbiosis and parasitism.
Right. Spiritual vampirism. That sounds intense.
It does. It draws parallels to physical parasitism, ecto, endo, temporary, permanent, suggesting negative energetic attachments can happen.
Like exploitation on an energetic level?
That's the concept. Obsession and this vampirism are seen as deviating from, basic spiritual laws of selflessness.
And this can lead to ovoid parasites,
Yeah.
feeding off psychic energy.
Yeah, living in a morbid symbiosis, it says.
Yeah.
An unhealthy, energetic entanglement.
That's pretty dark. Is there a way out?
Well, yes. The book suggests therapy, essentially. Acts of genuine good, breaking negative sentiments, the power of positive example. Emphasizes our ability to overcome these states.
Okay, shifting back to the brain for a second. It's seen as a tool of the mind.
Right. The cortex corresponds to the psychosoma cerebral center, and the diencephalon houses the coronary center.
And they need to sync up for the spirit to express itself.
Yes, and that monoideism, the fixed negative thought, it suggests it can cause physical issues like amnesia or aphasia by blocking brain areas.
And similar blockages can happen in the spiritual body's energy centers.
Apparently so.
Yeah.
It shows that deep link again. Mental, spiritual, physical, all interconnected.
We should touch on the aura too. The energetic halo.
Mm-hmm. All living things emit radiations, forming this halo. In humans, it's enriched by our continuous thought.
Forming the vital body, or etheric double.
And it acts as a sensitive mirror, reflecting our soul state, even exhibiting thoughts. It's like an energetic interface with the world.
And mediumship fits in here too, as communication between realms.
Yeah, evolving from more primitive forms to conscious ones. The book highlights the Spiritist doctrine's role in giving it a moral framework.
Christianizing it, emphasizing ethical conduct.
And presenting it as inherent to life, a natural capacity, but unique to each person, needing cultivation, personal improvement, noble aims for it to be used responsibly.
The perspective on sex and love is also really interesting. Sex differentiation starting from active, passive spiritual principles.
Even mentioning potential hermaphrodism in some animals, like the bitter's organ in toads.
The core idea being that the sexual instinct is actually love starting to expand, a driving force in evolution.
Yeah, connecting beings magnetically, it views sex as fundamentally mental, transcending just the physical form.
Evolving from animal urges to higher expressions of virtue, intelligence.
And this idea of spiritual nourishment through exchanging psychic magnetic rays, especially in love, even between incarnate and disincarnate beings.
Wow, like highly evolved spirits receiving sublimated energy from even higher ones.
That's the picture painted. Polygamy and monogamy are seen as stages in learning the moral responsibilities involved in love and relationships.
It even redefines hell, doesn't it? Not fire and brimstone, but
More like a controlling organ for moral balance, a prison hospital for those who are perverted or suffering deeply.
so a state of being, a learning place, potentially rehabilitative, where even negative intelligences might become instruments for others' re-education.
Exactly. It shifts the focus from eternal punishment to consequence and potential change.
And reincarnation is revisited again. Not just for fixing mistakes, but natural growth.
Acquiring knowledge, virtue, and spirits often request specific challenges in their next life, trials needed for conscious self-improvement.
And the more evolved the spirit, the more influence they have on their physical body formation.
Yes, while less evolved spirits are more subject to genetics. It even mentions anatomic sculpture institutes in the spiritual plane.
Blueprints for future bodies.
Mm-hmm.
That's incredible. And sometimes these lives include illness or limitations as part of the plan.
A challenging perspective on suffering, seeing it potentially as part of a chosen learning path.
Briefly, it touches on religion, too, how divine intelligences guided early human physical development.
And the need for education to purify thought, moving beyond animal impulses. Moses is mentioned as bringing the idea of one God to the public.
Highlighting spiritual influence on consciousness and our concept of the divine.
Then there's cellular respiration.
Yeah.
Also seen through this spiritual lens.
The spiritual body influencing physical functions automatically, maintaining balance.
Right. And the idea that we're nourished more by respiration, by energy intake, than just food volume. Plus, psychic nourishment from loved ones' energy exchange.
That really changes how you think about energy and connection.
Absolutely. It emphasizes the energetic links, the importance of emotional bonds for well-being.
What about communication for those who've passed on? How do they talk?
Primarily by exteriorizing their own image, apparently. A direct projection of self.
And advanced spirits can create living pictures with their thoughts, like direct mental communication.
Seems so. Beyond spoken words. Their forms generally resemble their earthly ones, but evolve towards a better presentation in higher spheres.
So form reflects the dominant mental state, including psychosomatic gender characteristics.
Generally, yes, unless undergoing specific trials. More evolved spirits have more control, more plastic power over their spiritual body's form.
And their social life, does it mirror Earth?
In the immediate spiritual plane, many stay connected to earthly interests, yeah. But souls tend to seek out environments suited for their self-improvement.
And marriage there is based purely on affinity.
The highest degree of elective affinities, it says. Which is maybe why it expresses concern about easy divorce on Earth, given the responsibilities of marriage. Suggests relationships continue to be important learning grounds.
It comes back to the sexes again near the end, suggesting the characteristics eventually fade.
When souls have assimilated all experiences needed for sublimation, yeah. Reaching an angelic state embodying all noble qualities of both masculinity and femininity.
But it also warns about consequences for irresponsible sexual behavior, abortion, impacting the spiritual body and future lives.
Yes, things like future health issues, endocrine problems, mental disturbances, trauma to the generative center, emphasizes the long-term impact of choices.
But again, there's hope. Daily moral improvement can renew destiny.
Always that possibility of change and growth.
And finally, it wraps up with things like magnetic healing.
Magnetic fluid influencing cells, promoting health via the deep consciousness. Moral decline causing lesions in the psychosoma, reflecting physically.
So passes, prayer, strengthening will can restore balance.
That's the suggestion. And microbial invasion. It's not just hygiene. Self-created imbalances, rupture fields in the psychosoma create susceptibility.
Mental issues like dystonia affecting cells, leading to things like cancer.
That's the origin proposed, emphasizing moral renewal, humility, service, connecting to divine love for healing.
It distinguishes between local endemics needing hygiene and individual karma.
And treatment in the spirit world involves history, examining psychosomatic tissues, karma, sometimes needing reincarnation for full healing. They use analogous medications, but focus heavily on moral qualities, psychotherapy, magnetism.
Wow, that covers a lot. The interconnectedness is just staggering.
It really is. I think what was particularly surprising for me was just how detailed the description is of the interaction between spiritual and physical, down to the cellular level, proposing these energetic mechanisms.
Yeah, and that metamorphosis analogy, that really provides a framework, doesn't it, for thinking about death and transition.
It makes it less of an ending, more of a transformation.
For me, the aha moment was really grasping the depth of influence our mental and emotional state has on health, susceptibility to illness, even this idea of spiritual parasitism.
Yeah, that's unsettling, but fascinating. It gives a whole different lens for thinking about relationships and energetic boundaries.
So relevance-wise, this whole deep dive hammers home the impact of our inner life, right? Thoughts, feelings, choices on our well-being and our long-term evolution.
Absolutely. It pushes you towards a much more holistic view of yourself, connected across dimensions, you could say.
So for you listening, here's maybe a final thought to chew on. If our thoughts are constantly shaping the spiritual body, influencing our path, what conscious efforts can you make, maybe starting today, to cultivate thoughts, intentions that really support your growth and well-being on all levels, physical, mental, spiritual?
What does this really tell us about the power and maybe the responsibility of our own inner lives? It's quite profound when you think about it that way.